I'm Joanna Jayarajan. I was born in South London, grew up and went to school in Croydon.
My name is Mishali Patel. I was born here in South London.
My name's Jamie Niamin and I live in Croydon.
My name is Mira Baba. I'm originally from Croydon and I now live in central London. For work, I currently work in strategy and finance.
Hi, I'm Janaki Mehta. I'm born and brought up in Croydon and I still live in Croydon.
My name is Shan Patel. I'm 31 years old and I was born and brought up in Croydon. I'm a working professional, but I'm also trained as a classical South Asian dancer.
I'm Roma Patel. I was born in Essex and I was raised in South London. I'm currently a university student studying economics and international relations.
My name is Brianna Pankania and I'm currently a student at the University of Birmingham and I study business management.
I'm Sasha Patel. I'm 38 years old. I'm a British Asian with parents from Africa. I was born in Croydon and I currently work in the energy engineering sector.
My parents originally were from Africa and both born in Africa. My dad was born in Zimbabwe and my mother born in Kenya. My great-grandparents had migrated over from India over to Africa, and then my parents made the jump and moved over to the UK when they got married.
So one of the things I always remember that my mum said about coming to the UK was the day after she arrived, my dad took her to buy a winter coat in a department store in Tooting. And my parents, because in Sri Lanka there was no communal language, it's either Sinhalese or Tamil, the common language was English, so my parents were educated in English, they went to university, they studied all in English. And so when my mum went to buy the coat, she went to the counter to pay for it, the lady said to her, "Oh, you speak very good English." And my mum said, "Oh, you know, I've always studied in English, I did a university degree in English." And the lady was just astonished, because at that time, you know, a lot of people who came didn't speak as good English. And I think my mum was the first person she met who looked Asian, who she felt spoke really good English.
Both parents were born in India and they both moved to Zambia at a very early age in their late teen years. And my grandparents on my mother's side, my great-grandfather moved to Zimbabwe, and both my grandparents both lived in Zimbabwe and grew up and built a life for themselves in Zimbabwe.
In terms of my family background, my dad was born in Tanzania and my mum was born in Kenya, both in East Africa.
But my parents are actually of Indian origin, but they did move, well, my grandparents moved from India to Africa, and then we've arrived in London where I am today.
So like most British-born Gujaratis of my generation, my parents came to the UK via Africa, both from two different areas. My dad's family came over from Zambia. My father was born in Lusaka with his siblings there. And my mum's family are from Uganda. My grandfather on my mum's side was actually born in Uganda as well. It was my maternal great-grandfather that moved over to Uganda, I believe, under the kind of indentured system to help build the railways there.
My parents, they were born and raised in the UK. My dad's from Essex and my mum's from Surrey. But my grandparents, they were born and raised in Kampala, and following the Idi Amin expulsion, they sought refuge here in the UK.
My grandparents met and got married in Uganda, and there they had my mum and my uncle. And then in 1972, they got kicked out and they moved to the UK. And then my dad's family is from Kenya, but he was born in Southall.
Both my parents were born in Africa. My mum was born in Uganda and she came to the UK when she was 16. My dad was born in Kenya and he came to the UK when he was 8 years old. On my dad's side, they travelled to Africa for work and their family also lived there. And on my mum's side, they travelled there just for a better life, really. And there was obviously a lot of history in terms of Asians going over to Africa following obviously the British rule.
British female woman born in the UK, but I still see myself as a Gujarati woman.
I say that I'm a British Sri Lankan, but for me both of those are a bit problematic because I'm a Sri Lankan Tamil. I'm an ethnic minority who, you know, to some degree or extent, the Sri Lankan community or the government were trying to get rid of. I would say that I'm British, but I wouldn't say I'm English. For me, British is a nationality, but English is a race.
For a long time, I actually identified myself as Zambian British because I hadn't been to India. I hadn't met any of my family from India, and it just felt like kind of a distant land. Even though I practiced a lot of our Indian culture on a daily basis, I was still very much a proud Zambian. After I visited India in my 20s, it was just really insightful visiting the village where my grandparents grew up, and I suddenly found a new identity in that. And so now I always say I'm Zambian British Indian, because even though, you know, my great-grandparents were born in India.
Definitely British, and I am Indian as well. But in terms of my identity, it was only later in life that I realised the influence of East Africa on my sort of Indian heritage side. And the reason for this was through learning the local language of Gujarati and speaking it at home with my grandparents and my parents. It was only later on when I met Indians not from East Africa that I realised we had intertwined Swahili words and even in some of the food as well. So I would say my identity is British Indian with also an East African influence.
So living in London, I very much consider myself to be a British Indian. I feel so fortunate to have grown up here and been given so many opportunities. But I think internally I very much feel like I'm Indian, because I think that's the culture that I've grown up with, and that's what's really deeply connected to my soul and my heart. So if anyone really truly asks me culturally what I am, I will always say Indian. And even more so than that, I like to call myself a Hindu. I'm very proud of the religion that I have grown up with as well, and that's a big part of my identity.
I would personally identify as being a third generation British, Ugandan, Gujarati, but probably to the average person, like in the UK, I'd probably just say I'm Indian or Gujarati, because a lot of people don't really know about our history as East African Asians.
I identify as a British Asian, but also as a second generation immigrant.
I define my identity as a British Indian with parents from Africa. For me personally, it's really important to have all three, because I think that my personality, the language I speak, the friends that I interact with include all three.
If a question like that is to offend you, I think it's because you're receiving that question as almost an attack or challenging you being different from the norm. But there is no such thing as different. We're just varieties and different colours of the same format. But I wouldn't get offended if someone asked me where I was from, but it's a very vague question. It's like asking me, like, who am I?
It doesn't offend me if people ask me where I come from. I get it. I think people get it a lot when you see someone who looks similar to you. If I go into a shop, people will ask me where I am, where I'm from, and people often don't peg me for Sri Lankan. I don't look stereotypically Sri Lankan, so I've had a bit of fun with that when I've been in shops run by Sri Lankans and they don't realise I can understand what they're saying. But I think for a lot of people it's curiosity. I do the same. Like, I ask people on the counter from Aldi, you know, where are you from? And they'll say, oh, Romania or Poland. Or so for me, I do it out of interest in other people's culture. So hopefully most people do that for me too.
Once in a while I'll get a comment of where are you from? There's a slight accent, there's a certain naivety that comes across. So, you know, I have been asked before, you know, you come from Zambia, but I thought everyone from Zambia was of black coloured skin. And you know, you try and educate, you try and talk about your own history, and you know, that enlightens people as well, where there is a certain level of naivety.
I feel quite proud to say I have this such rich and interesting background to be able to talk about, and I usually find the nature of the questions are more from an inquisitive side rather than an offensive side. And I would say even in a professional environment as well, people are always curious to know, where are you from?
I think it's quite common living in London that we often get asked, where do you come from? Where are your parents from? It's a question of curiosity which comes quite a lot. I had it a lot at school. I had it less so at university, I would say, but as soon as I started working, I felt that question came back into the arena, and I was often asked by work colleagues where I'm from. And I actually was part of a work seminar which was about diversity, where they actually told people to be careful about how you ask that question to people, because people may be offended by that question. But I have to say that personally I've always seen it as a question of curiosity.
I have been asked this question a number of times. I suppose when I was very younger in the UK, but actually outside of the UK as well. I've lived abroad, and it perhaps in places where it's not so common to see such a diverse kind of multi-ethnic society. And I'd always give the response that I'm British, but I'm a British Indian, and people wouldn't really understand what that concept meant, because I think it is something that is quite unique to the UK and where we're from.
I think when I was younger, I would actually just say I'm like British, because I had more like shame being Indian. But I definitely think now I'm more comfortable with, even when people say where do you come from, where are you from, correcting them and being like, well, you know, I'm a person, I'm from here, I was born and raised here, but equally I have ancestry in India.
When I was younger, I would mainly just say I was from London, and then people wouldn't really believe me. They wouldn't be like, no, but where are you actually from? And then I would say I'm from London, or I'm British, and then now I've just learnt to just say I'm Indian, because people will question it if I don't. And also growing up, no one actually ever assumed I was Indian. Everyone would guess different places, and I would be I wouldn't be happy about it, but I felt like it was cool to not be Indian, whereas now I prefer when people start by saying that I am Indian, or I say that I'm Indian and they just believe me.
I have been asked the question, where do I come from, on quite a few occasions, more so when I was younger, where people wanted me to answer I'm Indian, but obviously I've got a complicated history and a complicated journey with my family. It's not really bothered me so far. Where it did bother me was I lived in France for a year, and when I answered the question and said, well, my parents are from Africa, I think they were very confused because my hair was quite straight, and that's what they commented on. And I then had to explain, like, you know, we've had a history here, we've migrated, and it came from these situations. And then I was born in the UK.
Much more so when we were younger, not so much now. I think it's because it's just talked about. It was, subtle racism was one of those things that existed, and so much so in the 80s and 90s. But I think as soon as we hit the millennium period, I think just the conversation, healthy conversation was fostered, and the whole brush it under the carpet attitude has been completely taken out of the way. And
I think you surround yourself with like-minded people. So my friends are from all sorts of background, West African, Indian, East Asian. So the people I surround myself with don't. But I think when I was working as a management consultant in particular, and I was working with people on C-suite executives, they didn't take business advice from a small brown woman very well.
Personally, I've experienced very little face-to-face racism. I don't know if I'm lucky or if I've just naturally been fortunate. I think in the people that surround me and in my profession, I don't feel I'm judged necessarily by the color of my skin, but I think there is that unconscious bias in terms of what school did you go to, what university did you go to, how much you've achieved, how successful someone perceives you are, because I think success is a perception as well. And I think the key word for me is there's an unconscious bias. I think, you know, I remember early on in my life, if I said I was from Zambia, it was almost, oh, so you're an immigrant. Now I find when people ask me where you're from and I say I'm from Zambia, it almost sounds trendy now, and people are very interested. And I don't know if that's, an age thing as you progress through life, or if perception has changed from around the people around us?
Yes, I did. When I was much younger, living particularly in a certain part of Croydon, racial abuse was shouted at us across the street, maybe even outside our home. The home was vandalised, the windows, which was quite, I was quite distraught as a child, and this was maybe when I was 11 or 12 years old. But I found that experience I haven't been exposed to ever since. So, more into my teenage years and then my adult life, I haven't experienced any racism.
I have experienced racism growing up quite a bit when I was at school, especially in my primary school and in my high school. It seemed to get a lot less throughout sixth form, my A-levels and my university time, because I felt there was just a lot more awareness about diversity and culture. But I think earlier on, in the 90s especially, there was a lot of racism at school, and I experienced quite severe racist remarks and comments passed towards me.
Yeah, definitely I have experienced racism. The most kind of overtly racist, there's two episodes I suppose. One of the most overtly racist encounters I've ever had, I don't fully remember. I was a child, maybe 3 or 4 years old, out on the park swings with my brother and sister, who are much older than me, and a couple of kids came up to me whilst I was on the swing, slapped me in the face, called me a paki and threw me off the swing, which was quite an aggressive thing to do. Slightly more recently, probably 8 years ago when I was at university, I remember wearing a kurta on my way home. I'd been to dance practice, so obviously I'd wear my dance practice clothes, Indian clothes. I was on my way home and walking down the street, and somebody told me to go back home.
I don't think kind of explicit racism, but maybe like microaggressions. So, people saying my hair is like greasy at school because I have oil in it, and that's just, it's not really racism, but it makes you feel different because they're like, ugh, like why do you have that in your hair?
I wouldn't say outright racism. I would definitely say I faced a lot of microaggressions. Like the school that I went to, people would use the words like curry muncher and things like that, or they would say that Indian smell, and they would talk about our food. My mum used to make me and pack lunch, and I remember once she didn't even make me Indian food, she made me a pasta bake, but the pot that she put it in, I had had Indian food in it previously, and then my friend, who was not my friend anymore, but she was like making fun of it and saying it stank so bad and how could I eat stuff that smells like that. And she made me feel really uncomfortable that I didn't eat that day at lunch, and I stopped bringing packed lunches in that were heated.
I think I would like to see investment back in Croydon. I went to Old Palace, which last year they've announced they're going to close, the Whitgift Foundation are going to close, which as the largest landowner in Croydon and someone whose charter is supposed to support the children of Croydon, I find horrific. And we've been trying to work to get some culpability in the organisation, which is difficult. What I'd like to see for Croydon is more investment, I guess, better planning, and I think things like more youth services, all these things that have been cut back have affected the way that the town's gone. I mean, I used to be happy to say that I'm from Croydon, but now if you say that to people, you get a bit of a reaction back, which isn't pleasant. But if you look back at, the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, people used to come from all over South London to shop in Croydon and to do things in Croydon. It would be great to get back.
Croydon is so diverse, and you see that just walking down the road in Croydon. I think we're fortunate that in this day and age there's so much opportunity to really get involved in different activities, initiatives, in whatever interests you, right? That could be cooking, it could be dancing, it could be sport.
Croydon for me is my base. It's where I was born, it's where I visit at least once a week, it's where my friends and family live. And for me, it's such a large part even of Greater London that I feel quite proud to say I am from Croydon, and seeing it develop even more is really quite exciting. So no matter where I move, I will always think of Croydon as my base.
Being born and brought up in Croydon, I think the place obviously naturally has a feeling of home. I think Croydon has a lot more significance for my parents than it does for me. I think it was their big move basically from Africa to the UK, and Croydon held a lot of importance for them, especially for my family who set up their business in Croydon.
Croydon's a very important place to me. It's where I have grown up from childhood to where I am now. Outside of going to university, it's where I've always lived, it's where I was educated. I was really fortunate to attend, one of the best schools in the area, if not London, which I think afforded me some really fantastic opportunities. But on top of that, the art scene in Croydon is also really vibrant. In the past year, 2 years alone, I've had the great opportunity to work with some fantastic local music and dance groups like the London Mozart Players, and the dance school I'm from is also Croydon based.
I mean, I have a lot of friends from school that are here, so for me, I've been to Box Park before, I visited family here, but I always feel quite comfortable in Croydon because it's quite a multicultural place.
Of most places in the UK, I would say I feel a bit more safer coming to Croydon because it seems a lot more diverse than other regions.
For me, Croydon is home. So it's where I was born and brought up, and I lived here for 18 years until I went to university. I've recently moved back to Croydon. The main reason is for family, but also my partner is here and work prospects are better, but also I think its proximity to London.
I mean, it's very diverse. It's constantly growing, constantly changing. That's one thing I have to always say about Croydon. It's a shame though that some of the changes that were promised or have been planned did not come into fruition. And I think that the result means that it's completely done a change in terms of Croydon's future, but maybe it's opened up a wealth of different new opportunities.
So these are my dance bells, and shake it. So for me, dance actually started in Zambia, and it really started from a very young age. My mom and dad were very passionate about preserving our culture, and so I started dance classes in Zambia, and something that I have continued through to now in my married years in Croydon.
So this is Ganesh, which is one of the main Hindu gods. For me, being completely immersed in Hinduism growing up, any sort of rituals, weddings always began with a presentation of Ganesh and also a prayer to him before we start anything.
One of these things is an original DVD set of the Ramayana, which is one of the epics in Hinduism, and this particular DVD set is from the very kind of famous version of the Ramayana. Now, after this there were many versions made, but this was the one which kind of brought the whole world to a standstill because it was made so well. I also have the Krishna book, which is all the stories of Krishna's life.
This here is an outfit that I would wear in performance, in Ghettto, and this is something I've only recently had tailored. It's actually made from a sari that belongs to my grandmother. The particular kind of type of sari in Gujarati is known as a Ghettto, which I suppose is a garment that married women wear traditionally very proudly, and it's very specifically Gujarati. This has been re-dyed, but it used to be a white colour with what we call bandhani inside the squares, which is a type of Gujarati tie-dye. And I guess, yeah, I really wanted to make an outfit from this because it belonged to my grandmother. It speaks to my Gujarati heritage, and it's something that I wanted to touch upon when I perform and kind of hold quite close to myself.
I bought this ticket to represent my heritage. It's an invitation to an Indian dinner and dance, which my granddad, Arvind, my mota dada, he would host these events every year at the Heathrow Marriott, and it was a big event for East African Asians in like the 80s, 90s to dress up, have parties, eat good food. My uncles and aunts would be at the front selling tickets, and I just feel like this really symbolises family and joint families, and I'm just really inspired by my granddad Arvind for bringing the community together in times of, hardship. They came to the country with anti-immigration policies, politicians like Enoch Powell, racism.
So this is my grandma's prayer beads that she got from India, and I think they've been blessed by the priests in India. And this means a lot to me, and it connects me to my heritage, because the older I got, the more cultured I became, and the more I kind of learned about my religion and our beliefs, and I became a lot more spiritual. And I think it really helps me feel connected to my family and my ancestors.
So I brought these bangles with me. These were given to me by my grandma, my dad's mother. So she had these made in India when she lived there as a young child. And when she came over to Kenya to get married, these were one of the few things that she brought with her. There was a set of 9 of them, so I have 9, but I tend to wear just 2. And she gave them to me obviously when I was in the UK, and these have actually been with me in all my journeys from city to city that I've moved. And it's something that I hope to pass down to future generations, because again it represents that journey that my family's had.
Actually, we went a few years ago, I went over to India to conduct my grandfather's ashes. So we went to Varanasi, and I popped over to Ahmedabad, so we went over to Gujarat to just kind of wrap up all of his paperwork. And in the building, in my mum's maternal home in the village, is the old pickle jar that she grew up having. Apparently they had like a whole line of them because he had nine daughters. But it's got heritage and memory, like a lot. It must have been in my family for over 100 years.
Can you guess what it is? Nope. This is a coconut scraper. So you cut the coconut in half, you hold the coconut here, and you scrape it. So this isn't a family one. My mum's still got hers from Sri Lanka. I'm not getting that yet. But coconut is an essential part of Sri Lankan cuisine. Like, there's hardly a dish that doesn't have coconut in it. So when I was a child, one of my jobs was to scrape the coconut out. So as immigrants, the first thing you lose is the language, and the last thing you lose is the food. And then when you've lost the food, you've lost your culture. So for me, this is an emblem of trying to keep your culture going.